The morning air in Vienna carried a chill that made Clara hug her coat tighter around her shoulders. The cobblestone streets glistened from last night's rain, and the aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from the corner cafe. It was Clara's first day at a new school, and every step she took echoed through the historic streets, filling her with both excitement and apprehension. As she entered the grand building of the European Secondary School, she noticed a girl sitting by the window. The morning sunlight spilled over her hair, turning the dark curls into a cascade of bronze highlights. Her eyes, hazel and observant, seemed to take in everything without missing a detail. That was Sophie. "Hi, would you like to sit with me?" Sophie's voice was warm, yet carried a quiet confidence that seemed far beyond her years. Clara hesitated for a brief moment, feeling both nervous and curious. Then she nodded. That simple act, the sharing of a chair, was the beginning of a friendship that would shape the next decade of her life. Sophie was unlike anyone Clara had ever met. She was imaginative, articulate, and seemed to carry a natural elegance. Clara found herself drawn not only to Sophie's talent for painting, but also to her understanding of literature. Together they would discuss Goethe, Hugo, and the intricate poetry of Rilke, debating the meaning of each verse as if the world outside their classroom did not exist. Weeks passed, and the girls became inseparable. Weekends were spent exploring Vienna's streets, from the opulent Hofburg Palace to the quiet cafes tucked along the Danube. Clara, usually shy and reserved, began to speak more freely. With Sophie, she could share her sketches, her private thoughts, and even her fears about growing up in a city full of history yet full of expectations. One evening, in the dim glow of street lamps, the two girls discovered an abandoned attic in Sophie's family building. Dust motes danced in the slanted sunlight that came through the small windows. "Let's make this our secret space," Sophie whispered. They brought cushions, sketchbooks, and old lanterns. Here, Clara wrote poems inspired by the Austrian landscape, while Sophie painted delicate watercolors of spires, bridges, and rooftops. Their conversations often stretched into the night. Clara would read lines of her poetry aloud, and Sophie would pause, brush hovering over paper, smiling. "That's beautiful. But what if we added a bridge here, to symbolize the connection between past and future?" It was not just art they were creating. It was a bond built from trust and shared dreams. Yet, even in these moments of perfection, small shadows began to emerge. Sometimes, when Clara received praise for her sketches in class, she noticed Sophie's smile falter for a split second. Sometimes, Sophie would comment lightly, almost jokingly, on Clara's meticulousness. Clara dismissed it. She told herself that friendship was about supporting each other, and surely Sophie's occasional envy was natural. Autumn gave way to winter, and the city transformed. Christmas markets appeared on squares, the scent of roasting chestnuts and mulled wine filling the air. The girls wandered among the stalls, sharing delicate pastries, sketching carousels, and talking about the lives they imagined for themselves. One night, standing on a bridge overlooking the frozen Danube, Sophie whispered, "One day we'll create something that people will remember, Clara. Something that will outlive us." Clara smiled, feeling the warmth of the scarf Sophie had given her. In that moment the future seemed limitless. She did not yet know that this friendship, so full of promise and dreams, would one day be tested by jealousy, betrayal, and choices that could shatter the trust they had built so carefully. For now, however, Vienna was alive with possibility. The soft music of a street violinist, the twinkle of fairy lights in the market, and the laughter of two girls dreaming together. It was perfect, and Clara believed it could last forever. By the time the first snow fell over the rooftops, Clara and Sophie had become known in the school as inseparable. Teachers admired their teamwork. Classmates envied their creativity. Yet, beneath the apparent harmony, subtle differences began to surface. Clara's family led a modest life. Her parents were teachers, dedicated but cautious, instilling in her a sense of responsibility. Sophie's family, by contrast, was affluent. Her father, a gallery owner, traveled frequently across Europe. Her mother, a former pianist, had a taste for luxury and sophistication. Clara often visited Sophie's home, a beautifully decorated apartment overlooking the city. She marveled at the artworks on the walls, the polished parquet floors, the rare books stacked neatly in tall shelves. It was during these visits that Clara first noticed the flickers of envy in Sophie's eyes. They were subtle, an extended pause before congratulating her on an idea, a faint sigh when Clara's poem won a small competition, but they were there. Clara, trusting and naive, ignored them, believing their bond strong enough to withstand minor insecurities. Their schoolwork together became more competitive. A science project on Vienna's historic architecture highlighted Clara's meticulous research, which Sophie occasionally admired aloud but subtly altered when presenting in front of the class. It was never blatant, never malicious. Yet Clara felt a growing tension, like a thin ice layer beneath a frozen lake, beautiful but fragile. Outside of school, the girls continued to explore Vienna's streets, the historic cafes, the bookshops tucked into narrow alleys. Yet even in these joyful moments, Clara could not fully ignore the first cracks appearing in their friendship. Sophie sometimes chose to share private thoughts with other friends rather than with Clara, and subtle remarks about Clara's reserved nature made her question the depth of their bond. One evening, walking past St. Stephen's Cathedral, Clara voiced her concern. "Sophie, do you ever feel like we are drifting apart?" Sophie smiled, brushing her hair back. "Of course not, Clara. We're just growing, that's all." Clara wanted to believe her, but the unease lingered, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. The first cracks in a friendship, Clara would later realize, do not appear with a grand betrayal. They appear quietly, almost imperceptibly, like shadows stretching as the sun sets. And while the warmth of autumn lingered in their memories, the winter chill was beginning to settle in their hearts. The first real betrayals were subtle, almost imperceptible at first. During a writing workshop at school, Clara poured her soul into a story inspired by the cafes along the Danube, the foggy mornings, and the echo of church bells. She read it aloud to Sophie, hoping for constructive feedback. Sophie nodded enthusiastically, praising the imagery and depth of Clara's characters. Yet, the next day, in front of their classmates, Sophie read a story strikingly similar, using Clara's words and her imagery almost verbatim. The applause was loud, but Clara's heart sank. She remained silent, unable to confront Sophie without feeling the weight of uncertainty and disbelief. Beyond academics, the betrayals continued in smaller forms. In art class, Sophie would subtly diminish Clara's achievements, joking lightly about her perfectionism. In social settings, Sophie would share secrets Clara had entrusted to her, often framed as playful anecdotes that drew laughter from classmates. Each instance, small on its own, accumulated into a heavy, invisible weight. Clara found herself questioning Sophie constantly. Was this intentional? Was it jealousy? Or had she misread their friendship? Her evenings were spent wandering through Vienna's quiet streets, the glow of the street lamps casting long shadows, reflecting her inner turmoil. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest, imagining the delicate spires she loved, wishing that their friendship could remain as pristine as her drawings. Yet, even as betrayal festered, there were moments of joy. On Sundays, they would skate along the frozen ponds in the Schönbrunn gardens, laughter echoing across the snow. Sophie would twirl on the ice, her curls bouncing, and Clara would follow, feeling a fleeting warmth, a reminder of why she had trusted Sophie in the first place. Small betrayals, Clara realized, were the true test of trust. They showed her that even in the most beautiful friendships, shadows could exist. And while the city of Vienna continued its serene, historic rhythm, her heart began to sense the quiet fracture that would one day break completely. The citywide European Young Creatives Competition arrived in late spring, a contest that celebrated art, literature, and innovative thought. Clara had prepared tirelessly, sketches and poems meticulously crafted, inspired by Vienna's rooftops, the Danube's reflections, and the quiet streets of the old city. Sophie also entered the competition. She asked Clara for guidance, requesting feedback and advice. Clara, trusting her friend, shared sketches, story drafts, and notes. She believed in collaboration and friendship above all else. But when Sophie presented her work to the jury, every image, every line, mirrored Clara's contributions. The audience was captivated, praising Sophie's visionary interpretation of the city. Clara's stomach tightened as applause thundered around her. Her voice, usually so confident, trembled during her own presentation. The judges were polite, but the moment she had worked for, her originality, her dedication, had been overshadowed. After the event, Clara walked alone through Vienna's narrow alleys, the lanterns glowing softly in the twilight. The betrayal cut deeper than any words could explain. She had trusted Sophie, confided in her, and shared her dreams. And now, her friend had claimed them as her own. That evening, Clara wandered past the Stephansplatz, staring at the cathedral's towering spires. The sky was painted with hues of orange and violet, yet the beauty of the scene could not penetrate the ache in her chest. She realized something crucial. Some betrayals are not loud or aggressive, they are quiet, consuming trust piece by piece, leaving a hollow where friendship once thrived. For weeks, Clara withdrew from school activities. She spent hours alone in her room, walking along the frozen canal, or sketching empty streets at dawn. The betrayal had shaken her to the core. Even the beauty of Vienna, the cafes, the music, the bridges over the Danube, felt hollow. But gradually she discovered a new source of strength. She revisited her notebooks, reading her own words with fresh eyes. Each poem, each sketch reminded her of the talent she possessed, independent of recognition or friendship. She began attending local workshops in art and literature, meeting other young women who shared her passion. In the quiet of old libraries, she found herself immersed in Rilke's introspections and Hugo's sweeping epics. Clara realized that her identity did not depend on Sophie's approval, nor on anyone else's. Months passed and she emerged stronger. Her art improved, her writing deepened, and her confidence returned. She exhibited her sketches in small galleries along the Danube, earning praise for her originality and perspective. It was a quiet triumph, one that Sophie could never take from her. In this rebirth, Clara understood an essential truth. Betrayal can shatter trust, but it can also illuminate the path to independence and self-discovery. Her connection to Sophie remained fractured, but it no longer dictated her self-worth or ambition. She was free to grow, to explore, and to thrive. Years later, while walking along the Kärntnerstrasse during a bustling spring market, Clara saw a familiar figure. Sophie. Her hair longer, styled differently, eyes still hazel but marked by years of experience and subtle sorrow. First, Clara hesitated. The memories of betrayal surfaced, sharp, yet distant now. Sophie noticed her too. Time seemed to pause as the two women faced each other amid the chatter and laughter of the city streets. Clara, Sophie began, her voice faltering. I'm sorry for everything. Clara's heart pounded. She remembered the sketches, the poems, the stolen moments. Yet, standing there in the sunlight, surrounded by Vienna's historic beauty, she felt a calm she had not known in years. I know, Clara said softly. I've carried the memories, but I am no longer angry. We are not who we were. The past belongs to the past. Sophie's eyes filled with a mix of regret and relief. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Clara smiled, not with malice but with acceptance. Life moves forward, she said. And so must we. They parted that day, each walking a separate path. Yet Clara felt lighter than she had in years. She understood that the true victory was not revenge but freedom. The freedom to live her life, unshadowed by betrayal. Clara spent the following years embracing her independence. She traveled across Europe, sketching canals in Amsterdam, capturing sunsets over the French Riviera, and studying in historic libraries in Paris. Her art reflected her journey, raw, vibrant, and unapologetically her own. She found joy in her own voice, no longer seeking validation from others. Each city, each street corner, became a canvas of her memories and aspirations. Through this journey, Clara realized that personal growth often comes from pain. She had been betrayed, yet she had emerged stronger, more insightful, and more capable of understanding the complexities of human relationships. Sitting by the Danube watching the gentle flow of water beneath the bridge, Clara reflected on her life. She had learned the profound lesson that trust and friendship are delicate, but self-respect and inner strength are enduring. Betrayal had not destroyed her. It had taught her resilience. She understood now that growth comes not from avoiding pain, but from embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward. The city around her hummed with life, street musicians playing softly, tourists laughing, cafe doors opening and closing. Clara smiled, knowing she had reclaimed her narrative, her dreams, and her peace. And so the story ended, not with sorrow but with quiet triumph. Life, Clara realized, is not about the betrayals we endure, but the strength we find to rise above them, to walk forward unburdened, and to embrace the freedom of our own path. Clara stepped onto the platform at Vienna's Hauptbahnhof, the crisp spring air carrying the mingled scents of coffee, wet cobblestones, and the distant notes of a violin echoing from a nearby street musician. She adjusted the strap of her worn leather satchel and breathed deeply, feeling both exhilaration and trepidation. The train she had booked was bound for Paris, the city she had always imagined as the epicenter of art and possibility. But more than that, it was a symbolic journey, a step toward reclaiming herself after the betrayal that had once defined her world. The carriage was filled with murmurs of travelers speaking in French, German, Italian, and other languages she could barely place. Their voices, though unintelligible in detail, created a rhythm that felt strangely comforting, like the city itself was singing a welcome to those who dared to venture beyond the familiar. Clara settled by the window, pulling her sketchbook from her bag. The blank page stared back at her, a silent challenge. She had brought pencils, pens, and watercolors, not merely to document the landscape she would encounter, but to capture the intangible sensations of life, emotions, fleeting moments, and the delicate brush of experience that she had learned to cherish after years of pain. The train pulled away with a low rumble, leaving the familiar spires and streets of Vienna behind. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching as the city dissolved into rolling hills and fields dotted with grazing sheep. Her mind wandered, recalling the alleyways of her childhood, the frozen ponds of Schönbrunn gardens, and Sophie's hazel eyes, the warmth and the shadow, the laughter and the betrayal. She allowed herself a brief, wistful sigh, acknowledging the memories without letting them weigh her down. She wandered through the streets of Le Marais, sketching facades, cobblestones, and the intricate details of wrought iron balconies. Each sketch was more than a study of architecture or scenery. It was an exploration of her own resilience, a meditation on the journey she had undertaken since the betrayal that had once threatened to define her. At the same time, Clara sought out artistic communities. She attended workshops in local studios, meeting painters, sculptors, and writers from across Europe. There was Isabella, a fiery Italian painter whose strokes were bold and unapologetic. Margot, a reserved French poet who captured melancholy with elegant precision. And Anya, a Russian violinist whose music seemed to weave colors into the air itself. Clara quickly realized that the world of art was not simply about talent. It was about observation, connection, and the courage to express what one's soul demanded. She formed friendships with these fellow creatives, finding in them both camaraderie and mentorship. Yet, even amid inspiration and growth, Clara's mind often returned to Sophie. She wondered what her former friend was doing, whether she had changed, whether she had grown. Clara recognized that the thought of Sophie no longer brought anger in the way it once had. It was now a quiet curiosity, a reflection on how both of them had evolved along separate paths. She began to understand that the shadow of betrayal could linger without dictating the course of one's life. The past could inform wisdom without imprisoning the present. One afternoon, Clara visited the Seine, setting herself on the steps along the riverbank. She sketched the bridges, the reflections of sunlight on water, and the boats drifting lazily along the currents. Nearby, a group of students practiced plein-air painting, their laughter mingling with the murmur of the river. Clara's pencil danced across the page, capturing the soft ripples, the swaying trees, and the intricate play of light that had always fascinated her. In that moment, she realized that art was more than a vocation. It was a lifeline, a conduit through which she could process, express, and ultimately transcend her experiences. Evenings were spent in cafes, where she would write in her journal, documenting the nuances of life she observed. The old man who fed pigeons every evening, the street performer whose melodies seemed to tell stories of lost love, the aroma of fresh baguettes mingling with roasted coffee beans. Every detail, no matter how small, became part of Clara's ever-growing tapestry of understanding. A reminder that the world, in all its complexity, could be both beautiful and challenging, nurturing and harsh. Weeks later, Clara attended a salon at a small gallery in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, a gathering of artists, writers, and intellectuals. Conversations swirled around her in a kaleidoscope of ideas, existential questions, debates on contemporary art, reflections on the meaning of history and culture. Clara felt both humbled and invigorated, realizing that she was part of a broader community, a continuum of creativity that transcended borders and personal setbacks. Through this immersion, Clara discovered a deeper sense of self. She understood that her experiences with Sophie, though painful, had prepared her for this moment. Betrayal had taught her resilience, introspection, and the importance of trusting her own judgment. She could navigate relationships, recognize toxicity, and choose connection without compromising her integrity. By the end of her first month in Paris, Clara had completed a series of sketches and paintings that captured the essence of her journey: buildings, bridges, and streets, but also fleeting human moments, glances, and smiles that told stories more profound than words could convey. She displayed these works in a small local cafe, where visitors admired the emotion, precision, and depth of her vision. It was the first public recognition she had sought for herself, not through Sophie's influence or validation, but through her own courage, perseverance, and talent. Late one night, Clara stood at the window of her Montmartre apartment, looking out at the city sprawled beneath a sky dotted with stars. The distant hum of traffic, the soft clatter of footsteps on cobblestones, and the occasional laugh from a nearby cafe reminded her that life was alive, vibrant, and full of potential. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling a profound sense of peace. The horizon was not merely a line where earth met sky. It was the symbol of possibility, a reminder that every journey, however painful, led to growth, discovery, and the chance to embrace life fully. Clara had left behind betrayal, isolation, and self-doubt. She had crossed borders, embraced new cultures, forged new friendships, and rediscovered the artist within herself. And as she opened her sketchbook to begin another page, she realized that the horizon was not something to reach. It was something to continually explore, day after day, stroke by stroke, breath by breath, heart by heart. The train of life had carried her far from Vienna, from Sophie, and from the weight of past disappointments. Yet it had also led her here, to this moment of clarity and renewal. And Clara knew, as the moonlight reflected on the rooftops of Paris, that her journey was only just beginning.
Spring had returned to Paris with a gentle insistence, painting the streets in shades of green and soft pastels. Clara walked along the Quai de la Tournelle, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, the Seine glimmering with reflections of early morning sunlight. The city, alive with movement and chatter, seemed almost to hum beneath her feet, carrying an energy that whispered possibilities, yet also the weight of lingering shadows. Clara's days had become a rhythm of creativity and introspection. She spent mornings sketching, afternoons wandering galleries, and evenings in quiet cafes where she wrote in her journal, cataloging the subtle, intricate details of her life. Her art had evolved beyond mere representation. It was now infused with emotion, memory, and the fragile threads of her own resilience. Yet, despite this newfound vitality, her thoughts often drifted back to Sophie. It had been nearly 5 years since their final confrontation in Vienna. Sophie had apologized, yes, but their paths had diverged, leaving Clara with the uneasy awareness that some relationships cannot be fully repaired. She had learned to live without her former friend's presence, yet a quiet curiosity persisted. What had Sophie become? Had she changed? Did she understand the depth of what she had done? These questions were neither urgent nor tormenting, but they hovered like distant clouds, shaping the horizon of Clara's reflection. On an overcast afternoon, Clara wandered into the Jardin des Tuileries, the crisp scent of wet earth mingling with the sweet fragrance of early blooms. She found a secluded bench beneath a tall, ancient oak and opened her sketchbook, letting her pencil move freely across the page. Lines formed effortlessly, the curve of a fountain, the subtle shading of a statue, the gentle sway of willow branches along the garden paths. Yet her hand faltered as a familiar voice called her name, soft yet unmistakable. Clara. She looked up, and there she was, Sophie. Taller now, her hazel eyes carrying a maturity tempered by years, her smile tentative but genuine. Clara's chest tightened. The sight of her former friend brought a rush of memories, laughter and betrayal, joy and heartbreak, the tangled web of their adolescent bond now transformed by time. Sophie, Clara said, her voice steady despite the fluttering of her heart. They stood for a moment, the space between them filled with unspoken words, the ambient sounds of Paris fading into a distant hum. I wanted to see you, Sophie began, glancing down at her hands, then back at Clara. I've thought about you, about us. I know I caused pain. And I've changed, or at least I've tried. I wanted to know if we could talk. Clara remained silent, observing her. The old trust she had once felt was no longer there, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Yet beneath her caution, a small part of her heart, the part that had once cherished friendship so deeply, longed to understand, to witness the person Sophie had become. They walked together along the Seine, past the Pont Neuf, their steps in sync yet hesitant. Sophie spoke first of mundane matters, work, art, travels, but gradually the conversation turned inward, toward the weight of their shared past. Clara listened, her own memories surfacing like stones in a river, smooth yet unyielding. You were incredible back then, Sophie admitted. And I didn't appreciate it. I was jealous, immature. I thought I had to compete with you to feel worthy. I see now how wrong I was. Clara's gaze drifted to the water. The Seine moved relentlessly, indifferent to their conversation, yet its steady current mirrored the passage of time and the persistence of life. It hurt, she said softly, more than you might imagine. But I've grown since then. I've learned that pain doesn't have to define you. You taught me that, even if unintentionally. Sophie nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek. I wish I could undo it. Clara considered this, realizing that forgiveness was not an obligation but a choice. She could harbor resentment, or she could acknowledge growth and move forward. And in that acknowledgement lay a subtle, liberating power. They spent hours walking, talking, and reminiscing. The city, with its historic bridges and centuries-old facades, became a silent witness to their cautious reunion. As twilight approached, they found themselves at a small bistro tucked into a side street. The lights glowed softly, illuminating cobblestones slick from a recent drizzle. Over shared pastries and coffee, they discussed art, life, and the ambitions that had driven them apart yet continued to shape them. Clara spoke of her recent exhibitions, of the sketches and paintings inspired by Paris, Amsterdam, and Florence. She detailed the mentorships and friendships that had nurtured her growth. Sophie, in turn, revealed her own journey, years of self-reflection, the art she had created, and the realization of the mistakes that had once clouded her judgment. As the night deepened, Clara felt a profound sense of clarity. Sophie's presence no longer threatened her peace. It was merely a reflection of the past she had transcended. They were no longer the girls who had shared stolen sketches and whispered dreams. They were women who had endured, evolved, and discovered the capacity to forgive without forgetting. They parted that evening at the foot of Sacré-Cœur, the city lights shimmering below. Sophie's eyes met Clara's, and for a moment, there was no tension, no regret, only acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them here. "Thank you," Sophie said softly, "for listening, for understanding, and for still being you." Clara smiled. "We're all works in progress," she replied, "and some horizons take longer to reach. But we get there, eventually." As she watched Sophie disappear into the Parisian streets, Clara felt the lingering shadows of the past dissipate. They remained as faint memories, lessons carved into her heart, but no longer chains that bound her. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw the bridges, the rooftops, and the glow of the city around her. Each line was a testament to survival, growth, and the quiet power of moving forward. Night settled over Paris, and Clara wandered back to her Montmartre apartment. The city's hum, the twinkle of lights, and the distant laughter from cafes created a symphony of life she had come to love. She realized that the shadows of the past were not enemies, but teachers, reminding her that betrayal, loss, and distance could coexist with forgiveness, insight, and self-discovery. And so Clara's path continued, unburdened by the weight of resentment, guided by the lessons of experience, and illuminated by the beauty, complexity, and enduring inspiration of life itself. The horizon had shifted, expanded, and revealed that, even in the presence of old shadows, new light could always be found. The crisp air of early autumn carried a sharpness that seemed to quicken Clara's thoughts as she walked along the narrow streets of Montmartre. Paris had shifted from the languid warmth of summer into a season of golden leaves and cool twilight. She carried with her a portfolio of sketches, bound in worn leather, and the weight of possibility pressing against her chest. A letter from the Galerie du Soleil rested in her satchel, its ink still fresh, an invitation to hold her first solo exhibition. Clara had reread the words countless times, hardly believing they belonged to her. The Galerie, tucked between bookstores and wine shops in the left bank, was known for giving opportunities to emerging artists. For Clara, it felt like the culmination of her journey, the countless hours of sketching, the long nights in cafes, the years of pain and resilience distilled into art that could now be seen, acknowledged, and perhaps even celebrated. But with opportunity came fear. As she laid her portfolio out on her small kitchen table, she stared at the sketches and watercolors, each page a fragment of her heart. The bridges of Paris, the courtyards of Florence, the foggy canals of Amsterdam, the faces of strangers caught mid-expression, all of it carried her fingerprints, her story, her essence. Would the world understand? Would they see the vulnerability woven into each stroke, or dismiss it as amateur longing? That evening, Clara met her circle of fellow artists at a café near the Place Saint-Michel. The familiar group, Isabella with her flamboyant Italian gestures, Margot with her soft, deliberate words, and Anya with her violin case leaning against the chair, listened as Clara shared the news. "Your work belongs on those walls," Isabella said, waving her espresso cup as though declaring a decree. You've captured something we all try to reach, truth. People will feel it. Anya nodded. Art is not perfection, Clara. It's resonance. And yours resonates. Their encouragement steadied her nerves, but inside, Clara remained conflicted. She wanted to believe she was ready, yet part of her feared exposure, not of her talent, but of her soul. In the weeks that followed, preparation consumed her. She spent hours in her apartment, refining pieces, experimenting with framing, and choosing which works told her story most powerfully. The gallery owner, Madame Delaunay, an elegant woman with sharp eyes and a voice like velvet, visited to review Clara's collection. "You have a gift," Madame Delaunay said, flipping through the sketches with careful precision. "Your lines are not merely technical, they breathe. Each piece feels alive, as though the viewer is not observing a city or a face, but living within it. We will build the exhibition around this essence. Lame de Ville's asterisk, the soul of cities." The title struck Clara deeply. It reflected not only her art, but her journey, the way she had walked through cities carrying both shadows and light, capturing them as mirrors of her own transformation. As opening night approached, Clara's anxiety grew. She walked the streets at dusk, studying the glow of lanterns on the Seine, the chatter spilling from cafes, the laughter of students outside bookshops. Each detail reminded her of how far she had come, yet how fragile success could be. She thought of Sophie of Vienna, of the years of doubt. It was as though her past lingered at the edges of her triumph, testing her resolve. The day of the exhibition arrived with rain. Clara woke early, the patter of droplets on her window steadying her heartbeat. She dressed simply, a flowing navy dress that allowed her to feel both grounded and confident, and tied her hair back. Her satchel, worn but beloved, carried her sketchbook like an old friend accompanying her to a milestone. The Galerie du Soleil glowed warmly against the gray drizzle outside. Inside, the walls bore Clara's work, frames hung with precision, spotlights illuminating strokes of graphite and washes of watercolor. The air smelled faintly of varnish and fresh flowers, bouquets sent by friends who could not attend. Guests began to arrive. Artists, critics, students, and strangers whose eyes flickered with curiosity. Clara stood near the entrance, greeting each visitor with a shy smile. At first, she felt invisible, a shadow against the vibrancy of her own work. But gradually, she noticed the effect her art was having. A young couple lingered before her sketch of Amsterdam's canals, whispering to each other about the softness of the reflections. An elderly man studied her portrait of a Parisian street performer, his eyes moist with unspoken emotion. Two students debated the perspective of her Florence rooftops, gesturing passionately with their hands. Each reaction was like a thread weaving into Clara's heart, affirming that her art had reached beyond herself. The vulnerability she had feared was, in truth, her strength. And then, among the crowd, she saw Sophie. Clara's breath caught. Sophie stood quietly near the back, dressed in a simple cream coat, her hair tied neatly, her hazel eyes fixed on a watercolor of the Pont Neuf at dusk. She did not approach, did not intrude, she simply observed, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Clara felt the old tension rise, the mixture of longing and hurt. But then she saw something new, humility. Sophie's gaze was not possessive or competitive, it was reverent, as though she, too, had become a witness rather than a participant. The exhibition unfolded like a dream. Madame Delaunay introduced Clara to critics, journalists, and collectors. Wine glasses clinked, conversations flowed, and the gallery hummed with life. Clara spoke about her process, her inspirations, and the cities that had shaped her. She answered questions with honesty, never pretending to have more certainty than she did, but always returning to the truth that art was her way of navigating existence. At one point, Sophie approached. "Clara," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "Your work, it's beautiful. You've become everything I once feared you could be. And I'm glad. Truly." Clara met her eyes and, for the first time, felt no sting of betrayal. Only acceptance. "Thank you, Sophie," she replied. "We've both grown." They shared a brief, fragile smile before parting again, each returning to her own path within the gallery. By the end of the night, Clara stood outside the gallery doors, the rain having ceased, the air crisp with the scent of wet stone. Paris shimmered, lights reflecting off the slick streets. She closed her eyes, letting the cool air wash over her. The exhibition had not merely been about art, it had been about reclamation. About proving to herself that her voice mattered, that her journey carried meaning beyond pain. She had faced the world with open hands, vulnerable yet unbroken, and had discovered that vulnerability was the very thing that connected her to others. As she walked home beneath the glow of street lamps, Clara knew that this was not an ending but a beginning. The horizon stretched farther than she could see, filled with cities yet to explore, people yet to meet, and art yet to create. And though shadows of the past would always remain, they had been transformed. No longer weights, but brushstrokes, part of a larger painting, rich with complexity, light, and the quiet, indelible beauty of being alive. Winter arrived quietly in Paris. The golden leaves of autumn had given way to bare branches, and the city now carried the muted tones of gray skies, fog, and the warmth of glowing cafes against the cold. For Clara, the season felt less like an ending and more like a pause, a moment between chapters, a breath before something new. The weeks following her exhibition were filled with unexpected changes. Reviews had been published in small art journals, and word of her work had begun to ripple beyond the walls of Galerie du Soleil. She received letters from strangers who had seen her sketches, letters of gratitude, of resonance, of stories shared in response to her own. Some spoke of memories of cities long left behind, others of lost loves or new beginnings. Each letter reminded her that her art had become more than a private refuge. It was now a bridge, connecting her life to the lives of others. But fame, however modest, did not tempt Clara. What mattered was not recognition, but the quiet affirmation that she had been seen, truly seen, without masks or pretenses. That realization, more than any praise, gave her a sense of freedom she had never known before. Still, shadows lingered. Sophie had disappeared again after the exhibition, leaving only that brief exchange of words. Clara found herself wondering if their paths would ever cross once more, or if that final smile had been their farewell. Strangely, the uncertainty no longer troubled her. Sophie was part of her story, yes, but no longer the center of it. Clara had learned that healing did not require erasure, but integration, the past living alongside the present, not dominating it. One cold afternoon, Clara boarded a train to the south of France. She wanted space, fresh air, a different rhythm than the crowded boulevards of Paris. The train wound its way past frost-covered fields and villages, with smoke curling from chimneys. She sketched as she traveled, children playing near frozen ponds, farmers tending to animals in the crisp air, the delicate patterns of frost on windows. Her destination was Provence, where lavender fields, though dormant in winter, still carried the memory of their fragrance. She rented a small stone cottage on the edge of a village, its walls thick, its fireplace warm, its view opening to hills that seemed to roll endlessly into the horizon. Life there was simple. Clara bought bread each morning from the local boulangerie, painted in the afternoons when the pale sun cast long shadows across the fields, and spent evenings by the fire with her journal open and a cup of tea in hand. It was there, in the silence of rural France, that Clara felt the final threads of her old self loosening. The Clara who had once defined herself by friendship, by betrayal, by fear of judgment, she still existed, but now only as a chapter in a larger story. The woman she was becoming no longer needed those weights. One evening, as the sky turned a deep violet and the first stars appeared, Clara walked out into the open field. The cold air stung her cheeks, but she welcomed it, breathing deeply, feeling alive. She lay down on the frozen grass, her eyes fixed on the vast, endless expanse above her. The Milky Way stretched like a river of light across the sky. For the first time in years, she felt completely unbound, as though nothing could hold her back, not betrayal, not fear, not even memory. Tears slid down her face, not of sorrow, but of release. She whispered into the night, words carried away by the wind. I forgive. I let go. I am free. From that night onward, Clara painted differently. Her new works were not only of cities and faces, but of skies, horizons, and the vastness of nature. She painted stars that seemed to breathe, mountains that rose like guardians, seas that carried whispers of eternity. Her palette grew bolder, her strokes freer, her vision wider. It was as if the universe itself had entered her art, teaching her that freedom was not simply escape, but expansion, the ability to hold everything without being crushed by it. Months later, Madame Delaunay visited her cottage, curious about Clara's progress. She studied the canvases lined against the walls, sweeping landscapes, night skies bursting with light, horizons stretching beyond the frame. These are not just paintings, Madame Delaunay said softly. They are declarations. Clara smiled, her hands still smudged with paint. Declarations of what? Of freedom, Madame Delaunay replied. Of a woman who has walked through shadows and come out carrying the stars. The words stayed with Clara long after her mentor had left. She realized that freedom was not a destination, but a state of being, a way of moving through the world with openness, courage, and trust in her own steps. When spring returned, Clara held another exhibition, this time in Marseille. The gallery overlooked the sea, and her works reflected that vast horizon. The opening was filled with locals and travelers alike, their voices mingling with the sound of waves crashing beyond the windows. Clara stood among them, no longer trembling, no longer doubting. She was not just an artist, but a woman who had found herself in the act of creation. And though Sophie was not there, Clara felt her presence in a different way, not as a haunting shadow, but as a brushstroke in the canvas of her life. She understood now that every betrayal, every loss, every sorrow had led her here, to this moment of clarity, strength, and boundless possibility. After the exhibition, Clara walked alone along the shore. The sea stretched endlessly before her, the horizon glowing with the last light of the setting sun. She removed her shoes and let the waves lap against her feet, cold but invigorating. She closed her eyes and whispered again, this time not as release, but as affirmation, I am free. The tide carried her words away, and Clara smiled. For the first time, she knew with certainty that her life was not defined by anyone else's choices. She had claimed her story, her art, her freedom. And as the night fell over the Mediterranean, Clara turned back toward the lights of the city, her heart open to whatever horizon awaited her next.